This is the DJI Osmo Action 5 Pro, and this, the GoPro Hero13 Black, the latest offering from the two biggest action camera manufacturers in the business. And so of course, the question is, which one's actually better for capturing and sharing your motorcycle rides? Well, in this video, we'll go through everything that you need to know to find out. But before we get started, a massive thanks to DJI for supporting the channel and sponsoring this video. Now naturally, you're going to expect this one to go the Osmo's way, and there are some clear benefits I think to this camera, but also they have said I can be totally objective, and I think there are some areas in which I think the GoPro matches it. And that's the first category I want to talk about really, and that's with regards to image quality. I mean, the Osmo does have a slightly larger image sensor, and I think if you're a really enthusiastic videographer and you really have a good look at the footage that comes out of each camera, you might well have a preference for one or the other, especially when you start getting into the more advanced settings. But I think for the majority of motorcyclists who are looking to choose between these two cameras, or for that matter anyone else who likes to shoot cycling or skiing or any other action sport, well, I think realistically the footage looks so similar that it's probably not going to be a big differentiator and a reason to choose one over the other. Both are shot in 4K at 25 frames per second because that's what I use for the rest of my footage. And I thought they both look good on colors, good on sharpness, good on exposure. And I ran them both with pretty much mostly automatic settings because that's basically what I think most people are gonna do. There's a couple of other areas which I think are specifically important for motorcycling as well. And one of those is the field of view, because you need a nice wide angle to capture as much of the bike as possible. And while there is an extra wide mod available for the GoPro at an extra cost, I wanted to test them like for like with the standard lenses fitted, and I actually thought they both perform really quite well. The key thing for me is being able to get both hands in the shot when you've got it mounted on your chin, so it needs to be wide enough to capture that. And as you can see from the footage, both do the job quite nicely. This one's in the ultra wide setting, the GoPro is in the super view, and while it does offer one called, I think, hyper view, which squeezes more of the top and bottom into the shot, I thought it looked too unnatural and too squished, and so it wouldn't be the one I'd use. I think in these two settings, they're very similar, and again, probably not a differentiating factor. Thirdly, for capturing motorcycle rides, which can be a bit lumpy and bumpy, then of course, you're gonna want good stabilization. And again, this isn't really an area in which I thought there was a huge amount between the two for your average biker. Mounted on the chin, your body acts as a bit of a natural gimbal, so both look really nice and smooth. And for something a bit more challenging, like mounted on the bar end of the bike that I was using, well, you can see how much it bounces and shakes for how much the logo is moving around on the tank. But if you look deeper into the frame and around the edges, you can see both cameras do an excellent job of keeping things watchable and smooth. So image quality, stabilization, field of view, you know, the sort of footage that you get out of the two cameras, I think, you know, really good, and I'd be happy with pretty much either of them. But where the differences do start to open up a little bit is with regards to the sort of practicality and usability. Firstly, I'd say have a look at the size of the two cameras. They are similar in terms of width, similar in terms of depth, but if you look at the height side by side, the GoPro does sit a little bit taller, and it's also not quite, but almost 10 grams heavier. When you've got something mounted on the chin of your helmet, you want it to be as small and light as possible. Firstly, because then it doesn't affect the balance of the helmet too much, but also visually, if you're shooting with another camera looking back at you, you don't want something that's big looking and cumbersome. So yeah, there's a slight advantage there for the DJI, although I suppose some of the difference is down to the fact that the GoPro has its mounting tabs integrated into the bottom here, whereas the Osmo, well, that uses a magnetic mounting system, and so that's realistically where that extra depth comes from. But the thing is, with that magnetic mounting system, having used these cameras for quite some time and then going to this one which doesn't come with the magnetic mounts as standard, you know, it's a really important feature for me, not only to be able to move the camera quickly between mounts, but also if you want to check the settings when you're out on the bike, to be able to just remove it without getting off the bike and then turn it around and have a quick look and change stuff. You know, that makes it feel much more convenient and easy to use versus having to do the thumb screw. There is, like I say though, a magnetic mount I think available for the GoPro, but it's 25 quid extra, and that's on top of an already higher asking price for the camera itself, which we'll get onto in a bit. Then when you've got that magnetic mount attached, well, you've still got that integrated mount in there. So if you compare them like for like, both with magnetic mounts, then this one still does come up a bit heavier and a bit bigger. One of the other key factors that I noticed when I was out getting these shots as well with these two cameras is the battery life. Now they've really improved it on the Osmo Action 5 Pro versus the Action 4 that I was using before it. And that's down to a couple of things, one of them being a slightly bigger battery, but also a new chip which they say runs more efficiently. To use a motorcycle analogy, if a manufacturer was looking to extend the range of a bike on a single tank, they could increase the size of the tank or make the engine run more efficiently, and it seems like they've basically done both. On the spec sheet, they're quoting 240 minutes for this one, or 4 hours when you're shooting in 1080p with a bunch of specific settings, whereas the GoPro, they're claiming 2.5 hours at 1080p, and so that really is quite a substantial difference. Now, the spec sheet can sometimes be a bit misleading, but I went out and did all these shots in the same sort of settings, so 4K, 25p, most of the same stabilization settings and stuff like that, and the DJI used just under 10% of the available battery life left, whereas the GoPro I think was more around the 15 to 20% range, which is sort of proportionate to that expected official battery life. Now the batteries are very similar in size, so 1950 milliamp hours in the Osmo, 1900 in the GoPro, so it really does seem like whatever they've done to get it to run more efficiently, and that could partially be that new chip, seems to have done the job. In fact, another thing actually, we've got this new always on screen feature for the Osmo Action 5 Pro, which means that you've always got some of the basic information like the runtime on the screen and you can customize that, but it really switches off the main preview of what's being captured. And it makes sense because once you've framed it, you don't really need to see yourself. And so maybe that is one of the things that they've done to extend the battery life. Either way, I'm happy with whatever they've done because it really does mean I can capture multiple rides on one charge and don't need to really think too much about taking lots of batteries out. Then you've got a slightly bigger screen as well on the back of the Action 5 Pro. So the screen on the front is give or take about the same size, but if you compare the one on the back, it's substantially bigger on the DJI, and that just means it's a lot easier to get through some of the settings. When you pull over at the side of the road, whip your gloves off, you want it to be fairly simple to, get to the feature or setting that you want as quickly as possible, and just a little bit of a bigger screen for me versus that camera and versus the Osmo Action 4 really just aids that ease of usability. So yeah, sometimes I use the actual screen for framing my shots, but the thing is when you've got your helmet on and the camera's mounted on your chin, you kind of want it to stay there, but also check the framing to make sure it's not pointing up too high or too low and capturing too much of the bike. So I normally do that with the smartphone app by pairing with the camera and using the preview feature so I can look ahead like I'm looking at the road and then look at the phone and make sure that the camera's pointing about right. And I ride a lot of different bikes, so it really can vary based on your body position as to how far forward you are or how far back. This is a crucial feature for me. There are lots of other things in the apps, more advanced settings, but 99% of the time I'm just using the preview feature. And while both apps are pretty decent, one of the differences I noticed is just the fact that the preview on the GoPro app is that little bit slower to start up. I timed it in fact, and I got 25 seconds for the Osmo Action 5 Pro, which, that's still a fair bit of a wait, but it was more like 35 seconds on the GoPro. And when time is of the essence, because a lot of the shoots that I do are against the clock, then that extra 10 seconds when you're used to using the DJI just feels a bit inconvenient. Then you've just got some other rapid fire stuff here that I just feel like is slightly better about this camera. You've now got 64 gig of internal storage, for example, which equates to about 47 gig of usable storage. And so you don't actually need a memory card to record stuff with this camera. Now for the asking price on this one, you get a spare battery and a free memory card. So it kind of feels like they're trying to counter some of the advantages with this one. But thing is, while I do largely use memory cards by default because it makes it easier to transfer all my footage, there has been the occasion when I forgot to put the card back in the camera, headed out to film something, I might be a couple of hours away, only to fire the camera up and realize there's no card. Usually I can maybe find one in my camera bag or maybe find one from another camera, but the thing is, now with that internal storage, I just don't have to think about it. There's so much storage there that I can easily capture a whole day of riding, absolutely no problems. Then another one is the compatibility with the wireless mics. Now both support Bluetooth connections with a mic like this DJI Wireless Mic 2, and so that means you can capture your voice in the helmet or use it for vlogging or interviews or things like that. But the thing is, with the new Osmo 5 Action Pro, you can actually support two mics at once. The GoPro, on the other hand, well, it still only supports the one, so if you try and pair a second mic, it'll boot off the first one. And so I think that just opens up a few more creative opportunities with this, like filming interviews or capturing a conversation with a passenger or a friend out riding, or even having one in your helmet, one in your pocket, and then in the edit you can blend your commentary on the ride with the actual sound of the bike and sort of switch between suiting the particular part of the video that you're working on. Now I also think when you're out biking and trying to capture your rides, you definitely want a camera that's hardy, and they're both well built, but if you look at some of the ratings for them, the Osmo seems like the one to go for. This, for example, is waterproof down to 10 meters, whereas this is rated down to 20 meters, and the operating temperatures I think are -10 degrees to 35 degrees on this, and -20 to 45 on this. Now, that sort of temperature at either end of that spectrum sounds pretty uncomfortable for motorcycling, but why wouldn't you want the camera that I suppose has the most buffer in terms of operating temperature and waterproofing? Now, with all that in mind, you've got to consider as well the price, and this one, the GoPro, retails for $399, whereas the Osmo Action 5 Pro starts at $329, so 70 quid difference. And while the fundamental image quality for me is comparable, there are just lots of little areas in which I think the Osmo outdoes the GoPro and makes for the better camera to use. So there we go. Of course, like I say, with DJI being a sponsor of the channel, you're gonna feel like I'm gonna say this camera is better anyway, but those are the hard facts. It's objectively better on battery, bigger in screen size, compare more mics, has a wider range of operating temperatures, it has a higher waterproof rating as well, and so the conclusion from me is that the Osmo has to be the winner. As always though, I'd love to know which camera you'd pick, so do let me know down in the comments below. And also, if you want to see my review of the Osmo Action 4, which is also an excellent camera but available for a slightly lower price than this one, then I'll put it on the screen now so you can give it a click and give it a watch in case you haven't already. Also, do hit subscribe if you want to see more of the latest motorcycle tech reviews like this right here on MOTOBOB. A massive thanks for watching today, and we'll see you in the next video.